just go as if the world is watching.
And so your mic's all set up?
I think so. Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It works.
So if you need to mute it, just press it, this little tap.
Okay. Thank you.
Check 1, 2. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. We know it's close to the end of the semesters and everyone is getting ready to make that final push towards that, so I appreciate everyone being here. My name is Kenneth Wong. I'm the Associate Dean for the Graduate School for the National Capital Region, and I have the privilege of being current president for the National Capital Region Faculty Association. The Faculty Association is really designed as a grassroots group for faculty to bring their concerns and questions and whatever they have on their mind to others in the university, and also to provide a chance for faculty to get together informally. So on behalf of the Faculty Association, we're very glad you're here. We try to recognize faculty who are both at the start of their careers and closer towards the end. Obviously today, we're working with Gazem, who's rising star. Rising star. Very good. So, and I'd like to start by asking Nick Stone to speak on behalf of the National Capital Region operations.
Thank you, Kenneth. And my congratulations beforehand. Haven't seen the talk yet, but
Thank you.
expecting great things. I just want to say that years ago, I'm a former president of the Faculty Association, and years ago we came up with this idea to recognize faculty who had given over the years to the region and really give them a chance to give that talk that they could never give because for whatever reason. And I think it's a lot of fun, and it has held on to this day. And it's a great bookend to have created the outstanding new investigator award, which is a terrific way to celebrate in the fall, and again to encourage participation and the community of the faculty here. So the National Capital Region is really pleased to be able to support and host this event, and really looking forward to its continuation. So with that, congratulations again, and looking forward to the talk.
Thank you very much. Okay,
You want to start? Or
sure.
anything else? Okay,
Yep.
great.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everyone for coming. It's an honor to be selected as the outstanding junior faculty, and I would like to thank the Faculty Association for this opportunity. Today, I chose a topic that I have been working on since my PhD studies. It is common knowledge and coordination on social networks. All these terms will be defined in the next couple of slides, with a focus on collective action, such as protests. With my co-authors and collaborators, whom I will mention throughout, we have been studying this topic both mathematically and computationally. And recently we were awarded by Minerva to run human subject experiments on this issue. Therefore, I thought this topic would be of interest to this group. The use of social networking sites, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Facebook, was a distinctive feature of recent wave of uprisings, such as uprisings against the authoritarian regimes in the Arab world, or after the financial crisis in the Western countries. Social media offers an easy and inexpensive way to communicate and helps the spread of information prior to as well as during the protest, which helped the protesters to get organized and reach a critical mass of participants. In repressive regimes, a single protester risks violence and has a little chance of success. On the other hand, when 1 million people protest, most of them will be unharmed, and they are likely to even overthrow the government. Therefore, protest is a collective action problem in which a person wants to participate only if joined by other individuals. Game theorists refer to this as the coordination game, where multiple people participate with the potential to achieve mutual benefits if their decisions are consistent. Since not all of us are familiar with games, I'm providing an example here, especially for you, Dave, where we have two players, and they have the option to choose between the actions participate and not participate. This is a payoff matrix. The first payoff is for the first player, the second payoff is the second player. And you can see that when they mutually decide to choose participate, as well as when they mutually choose non-participate, they are better off. So consistent decisions make them better off. In game theoretic contexts, coordination requires that people know about each other and that this information is common knowledge. So coming back to the previous example, player 1, if he wants to participate, he needs to know that player 2 wants to participate. And he also needs to know that player 2 knows about him willing to participate. So that's the common knowledge idea that we have. So they not only they need to know about each other, they also need to know about what they know. So public rituals such as ceremonies and rallies are good examples of social processes that generate common knowledge. In public rituals, not only the content of the message is important, but also knowing that other people get this message is an important thing that generates the common knowledge. The other thing is the inward-facing circular seating provides people with maximum eye contact. Therefore, people can verify other people's attention. That generates the common knowledge in these rooms. So most of the city halls, for example, are designed in a circular position so that they can generate common knowledge. The other example is the Super Bowl, where most of the advertised products are actually coordination game goods. And in these shows, popular shows, the advertising costs are higher because they generate common knowledge. When I watch a popular show, I know that many other people are watching this show. So therefore, they're charged more for these kind of popular shows. Is it clear so far? Social networks, which represent local interactions, may facilitate information sharing in a way that generates common knowledge within a group of individuals. So this is as opposed to a broadcasting mechanism where everyone in a room and some people makes an announcement, which generates common knowledge right away because everyone knows that everyone else is hearing this. But we're considering social networks which are only local interactions between people. And we want to understand whether these interactions can also facilitate this kind of common knowledge. And the communication mechanism and the structure of these interactions are important for generation of these kind of knowledge. So here, consider a three-person network that is represented by a binary relationship. So, which means that I arrow J indicates that agent I talks to agent J, which means that agent J knows about person I's willingness to participate. So coming back to the previous payoff matrix, also in this case, everyone needs one other person to participate. So as long as I know that someone else will join with me, then I want to participate. So when we look at the first figure, person 1 and 2, they both talk to each other. Therefore, they generate this common knowledge, and that is enough for them to participate in the collective action. On the other hand, person 3 only knows about person 2. He knows about himself, but it's not enough for him to participate because he doesn't know what person 2 knows, because he's not able to tell person 2 that he is also willing to participate. Is this clear? Because this is the idea, so I want to make sure that this will be clear. In the second example, person 3 knows both person 1's willingness to participate and person 2's willingness to participate. And since he knows the communication between two, he is sure that these two people will participate in the collective action because they need one other person, basically. Therefore, all three will participate in this example. In this case, since person 3 does not know or this link doesn't exist, it's not enough for knowing just person 1 and person 2 to participate. So, knowledge of, the idea is this. Knowledge of what other players know is important to generate this common knowledge, and this depends on the social network that they are located. Yes. Could you please press the...
So in A, the difference between number 1 and number 3, so 1 would participate because he knows, or 1 knows that 2 is going to participate and 2 knows that 1 is going to participate.
Yes.
And the difference between that and 3 is that 3 knows 2 is, but 2 doesn't know 3 well.
Exactly. So you send me a message saying that you want to participate, but you never receive a message back from me that I want to participate. So I think that you will not participate in this case.
Okay. So
Because you don't know,
there's a
I don't
second-
confirm
right.
your message, basically.
So there's sort of a second level of.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So common knowledge actually it's an infinite string of messages in theory, mathematically.
And then a solid line with no arrow means the confirmation text was received. Is that right?
Yes, so the ones without the arrowheads actually mean like both, you have direction in both. Yes. Is this clear?
Yeah, so I guess so in B, you've got number 3 there, who is aware that 2 people are participating and isn't going to participate. No, would participate. So in the third one, you know 2 people are going to participate, but you don't know that they know that you will, so you don't.
So
I'm not sure that it's clear why in the third case 3 wouldn't.
because 3 does not know whether 1 and 2 know about each other, right? I hear from you, you want to participate. I hear from Kenneth that he wants to participate, but that's not enough for me because I don't know whether you actually talk to each other. Or this could be also like maybe there is no link, that I know that there is no link between you two. So you just say that you're willing to participate, but I don't know what else you know.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Just to make sure now, since we're going along this path. So
Yeah, I'm happy when you
B-
ask questions.
In B, we have full participation. Is that right?
Yes,
But A and C,
you will not, yes.
yeah.
That's the structure of the network that makes a difference in this communication network. So as I said, the communication network is important, that determines the common knowledge and participation in collective action. And we want to understand which kind of structures actually lead to this common knowledge. To this end, we developed a dynamic game theoretic framework, a model, which analyzes the spread of information through these local interactions. So we address the following questions. So first we want to understand what are the requirements and implications of common knowledge that generates coordination. What is the role of network structure, and what is the interplay between the network structure and people's preferences? So far we said that people need only one other person. Each individual needs only one other person to participate, but there might be people who have a higher threshold, who might need a lot of people to participate because they find the action more risky than others. And we also, as I said before, we also develop computational models based on these mathematical model, which allows us to introduce more realistic features. So we can introduce links, weights on links, and we can look at different people with different preferences, and we can introduce some stochastic processes. And here we will need some initial conditions and analyze the diffusion process, how it evolves over time. There's a huge literature on collective action and coordination, so I won't be able to mention those, but today I would like to talk about these models of social contagion as a point of comparison. The significant impact of civil unrest events led to development of models that analyze information spread on networks. And these contagions could include information, emotion, influence, etc. We have seen many papers that study influence, diffusion, information diffusion, etc. But these topics are largely studied by unilateral models of contagion, such as the independent cascade or threshold models. We will refer to these kind of models classic diffusion models, which could be simple contagions or complex contagions. In these models, an agent's behavior is solely based on immediate neighbor states. So people look at their neighbors, direct neighbors, and look at their states, whether they are participating or not. And then they decide to participate to the collective action or not. And these decisions are unilateral decisions. I don't take into account what you might do when I'm taking a decision. I don't take into account my expectation about other people's. I look around when I see people, then I follow, basically. So here, I'm giving an example of such a process where initially person 2 and person 6 are in the participating state, which is shown as green. Person 4 looks around, and assuming that people have threshold 2 in this case, meaning that they need at least 2 of their neighbors to be in participating state so that they can join the collective action. Person 4 looks and observes that his neighbors 2 and 6 are in the participating state. So person 4 in the next step will turn also green, will participate, because there's a sufficient number of people for him to join the protest. And in the next step, person 1 will look and will observe that 2 and 4 are in the participating state. Therefore, he will turn in the next time step. So this is the process that occurs. So as you see, in this process, the spread of information or mobilization is similar to a spread of an infection. Infection on a contact network. When I'm in contact with someone infected, and then I have a probability of being infected or not. And the focus of these models are more like on a small localized groups and leading to widespread contagion. And they always need initial seeds in these models. So here, for example, 2 and 6 had to be seeded for the contagion to start in the first place. On the other hand, in our models, we're talking about mutual participation in a risky action, which can allow for small and large groups to start the contagion in different parts of the network. Is it clear, the difference? Could you press the button?
Can you push the button and use your microphone? Then I can hear you better. There's a little silver button.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what is your objective here? What is the big picture?
So the big picture is to understand, given these networks that represent local interaction, bilateral interactions, what type of configurations will enable this common knowledge and people can jointly participate in collective action.
Suppose I was a dictator,
Yes.
which I am. I need to know whether there will be a group that is going to form to oppose me.
Yes.
You want to calculate the probability that the group will fall?
Yes.
That is the eventual
Under
goal.
what conditions a group can actually generate this, learn about each other, and participate in a collective action against me?
When you say
Right.
learn, you're just talking about a binary variable. You either join or you're not join, because learn means a lot
Yes.
of things.
So here, the information concerns their threshold, meaning that their willingness to participate.
So
It
it's
could be binary, it could be defined as a threshold. So I might need one more person, and a conservative person will need hundreds of people to participate. So threshold actually defines the willingness to participate, their preference to participate. So it's not binary in this case. So threshold 2 means you need 2 people to participate.
No, but the interaction between two people is binary.
Yes, the action is
The
yeah,
action is binary.
exactly. Yeah, in this first model, actually, like you participate and you don't even go back. So it's always in one direction. So you're in a non-participating
What about
state.
the possibility that there is a problem? You ask somebody, will you join me in this horrible act that I'm going to commit? And the person, you don't know whether the person is going to say yes or no, but there is a probability that the person is. In other words, is there a probability associated with these binary interactions?
So that's a good point. In this common knowledge literature, since we're talking about the risk that is really high, you always want to make sure there's no, if you give a small chance that person may not actually participate, you never do. So this is the extreme case. So they have this email game where, we're going to attack a country. And then I send you an email, let's attack this country at this time, at this location. And I wait and assume that for us to be successful, both of us should be attacking that country. So I need a confirmation from you, first of all, to my email, saying that, okay, I'm going to participate. But then you wait for my confirmation that I received your message. That's the iteration that's going on. So in these models, you need to make sure if there's a single chance that the other person is not going to participate, you don't.
What about sabotage? You say you're going to participate, but you want to mess up the whole network.
So meaning that you actually do not...
You're lying.
You do not commit to your... This is not
you
covered
commit yourself,
here.
But your objective is to destroy the network.
But in this setup, you don't... I mean, in this model, which you will see, you don't have any incentive to lie about it. Because you benefit if you participate yourself.
But aren't we just talking about the weights that are on the edges? We haven't gotten there yet, right?
No, yeah, exactly. There are no weights here on the... No, not here. No.
But we're talking about the probabilities and somebody being a saboteur or whatever, right?
Oh, no. There are
We're
two
talking
things.
about distribution around the weight and all that.
Right. No, there are two issues. One is you're sympathetic to the cause, but you're not prepared to stick your neck out.
Sure.
The other one is you're absolutely unsympathetic to the cause, but you're going to lie and say, yeah, I'm going to participate to learn more about your network and then destroy your network.
So
But all
in
this
this...
is the mathematics is just a weight, right?
So in this model, you will not have an incentive to lie.
In the theoretical model.
Yeah, theoretical
model.
model. Exactly.
She'll get to your question.
Yeah. So
When
this
she
is
moves away
I'm
from the
now
theoretical.
first presenting a very stylized model,
Yeah.
which doesn't allow for any of the things you're mentioning, basically. It's just very simple. People communicate. If they are sure that the other person or the other people will participate with them, they do. They do not have any incentive to lie. And if there's any probability that the other person is not going to do it,
sure,
they
then
don't
it
do it.
goes.
Yeah, this is a very stylized model. Because those are the ones we can actually analytically solve.
That's interesting.
Thank you. So our model actually builds on the work by Chue, who is the first one to model social structure and individual incentives together to understand which networks are conducive to coordination. And he develops a coordination game of incomplete information, as I will be presenting, and asks, when is it an equilibrium that everyone revolves? And he finds that cliques where everyone is connected to every other person are the important minimal sufficient networks that generates common knowledge and collective action. So in our setup, as opposed to Chue's, we introduce features of online social networks. We're modeling Facebook here. I hope you are familiar with Facebook, but I will be talking about it. I will try to explain, if not. In this type of communication, people have the opportunity to write on each other's walls, which are also observable by their neighbors in distance too. So here you will see that Jack writes to Mark's wall, which is observable by David. So Jack actually can observe the communication between the two through Mark's wall, or timeline, or newsfeed. I don't know what they call it right now. And one of the key features of the real social networks is that people do not have information about the full network structure. Chue, in his model, assumes that the network structure is commonly known by everyone else in the network. So we're introducing this realistic feature where we limit this knowledge to a local level. So you only know your neighbors' neighbors. You do not know more than this in the network. And we also introduce a dynamics that is different than Chue has in his model. So we're saying in our model that people get more information when they learn about their neighbors' thresholds, their willingness to participate, and their actions. So I will give an example. So we will call it as an inference mechanism. So if I have a very conservative friend, conservative meaning here that high threshold, right? Like he needs a lot of people to participate. If I see my conservative friend who participated in the protest, that gives me a lot of information about how many people out there can be, because I know that person will never participate unless he's sure that there's a sufficient number of participation, right? So we introduced this kind of mechanism in our model. Chue has a different dynamics. In his model, people at each time step connect to their direct neighbors. So I think he assumes that the network gets smaller over time. People get to know more people over time, but we do not use that assumption because it's not very realistic. Because in a couple of steps, the network becomes fully connected in his model. And in our model, we analyze the contagion dynamics in comparison to Chue and in comparison to the classic diffusion models, social contagion models that I mentioned before. I will introduce some notation for those who are like me, who needs them to understand fully what's going on. So we have a finite set of people who can choose between the risky action or the safe action. Risky action is participation in the protest. Safe action is to stay at home. We have agents that have different preferences, which are defined by the threshold, as I said. It starts from 1 to n plus 1. A person with a threshold that is n plus 1 means that that person will actually never participate because he needs more people than what they have. And a person with a threshold 1 is an activist who doesn't need anyone to participate. So this is the utility function, the payoff function, that dictates what people should do, basically. So if a person stays at home, his payoff is 0. So there is no benefit or there is no cost of staying at home.
Whose utility is this?
This is every individual's utility in the
This
network.
is the individual's utility.
Everyone's.
So by staying at home, I may still get a large utility. I may be safe. For me, that's a positive utility.
So this is the very standard collective, like this is the simplest form that we're using. But you're right, definitely. You know, people, there is another aspect to it. So if you consider public good games as opposed to the coordination one, you can actually free ride from other people's participation by staying at home. Because if they overthrow the government, maybe you're going to benefit from that too. But here we do not have that consideration. If you participate, if agent I chooses R, the risky action, and if the number of people that are participating are above his threshold, then he gets the highest utility. So if a person sees there is a sufficient number of people for him to participate, and if he chooses to participate, he's better off. If it's the other case, if he goes out and there are not enough people on the streets, then he will get a penalty. So this penalty is high enough so that he never takes that risk. So he always participates as long as he's sure that there's a sufficient number of people. We have a communication network which is undirected. So when I write, remember the communication structure is the Facebook type of communication where I write on someone's wall my preference, my threshold, and the other person also writes on my wall. That's the link. So here you see, for example, like person 1 writes on person 2's wall, person 2 writes on person 3, vice versa, and they have information about each other's preferences. Here, again, if we had the 4th person, person 1 will not know about person 4 because that person is not within distance 2 from him. So that's how we limit this information. Capital N sub I defines a direct neighborhood, and capital B sub I will define a circle of friends who are within distance 2 from you. In the timing of the game, let me check the time. How much time do I have?
Keep going.
Okay. So we start with a population of people with different or same thresholds, preferences, which are given by nature. We're not interested in how these preferences are formed. At time 1, people communicate their thresholds with their direct neighbors, which are observable by their neighbors in distance 2, because we're using the Facebook framework. And then they decide whether to participate or not based on this communication. At time plus 1, people who haven't chosen to participate in the previous period, they look around and they observe who has participated, and they still keep that communication, and therefore can still decide to participate or not. We define the equilibrium as a profile of actions where people do not have any incentives to deviate from this equilibrium. Okay, so I'll give one small example just to give you an insight about what knowledge, when I say knowledge, what knowledge is. So imagine two people with two types. I mean, they can have one of the two types. So W refers to willingness to participate. So a person with the type W is willing to participate. X means he's never going to participate. So I'm just assuming there are only two types in the population, which involves two people only. So the possible states of the world are WW, WX, XW, and XX, right? Like these are the possible states of the world. I can be W, you can be W. I can be W, you can be X, vice versa, and we can both be X. So when we don't communicate, what do I know about the state of the world? I know my type. If I'm W, I have uncertainty about what your type is, whether you're willing or not, right? Or in the second partition, I know that I'm X, but I still don't know what your type is. So I would never participate in this case. So no one revolts when there is no communication. When we introduce the communication between people, then person 1's and 2's information partition becomes singletons. So I know when I'm W whether you're W. I know when I'm W whether you're X, right? And in this case, what happens is that when the actual state is WW, we both participate when our types are the same. So this is the way to model knowledge. So as I said, in our model, people must know each other's thresholds, and they must know that the people know their threshold too. I know it's getting confusing, but I hope you're following me. So I'm going to give an example to make sure that we're all on the same page. So when you look at the star example, you know that person 2 communicates with person 3, person 4, and person 1, right? And through the wall of person 2, they are all aware, they all know about each other's threshold. Okay? Similar in the square. Person 1, person 4 communicates directly. Person 1 and person 3 communicates through person 4's wall. These are all the assumptions of the model. The interesting example is the pentagon, where person 1 communicates with 2 and 5 directly, and he also learns about person 3 and person 4 through the walls of person 2 and person 5 respectively, right? So assume that person 1 is threshold 4, which means that he needs 3 more people to join in the protest. Person 1 knows about 2 and 3, knows about 5 and 4, but this information is not enough for him to participate because person 1 does not know whether person 3 and person 4 know about each other because he doesn't know about this link. So as I said before, in Chue's model, network was assumed to become a knowledge. So in that case, they actually find out they know it from the start. But in our case, since this communication is only limited by distance to neighbors, then person 1 will never participate in this case. Although he knows about everyone else in the network, since he doesn't know what they know, the coordination will not take place. In this example, we have a square which we know that the coordination takes place, and there's a star here. So in this case, everyone will participate. So the takeaway from this slide is that network 3 and network 4 have both the same number of nodes and same number of edges. But just because of their structure, you end up with really different results. In one case, you do not have coordination. In the other case, you have. Okay? So here are the main results of this stylized theoretical model. So the first thing we observe is that first, people has to be within distance too, because that comes from the axiom that we used. And in addition to that, people need to observe the edges between people to be able to have that common knowledge. So you cannot have common knowledge with people where you don't know the interaction between them. So people need to be within distance too. For example, in the Pentagon example, everyone is within distance too. But it's not enough for them to coordinate because person 1 cannot observe this link between 3 and 4. So here it doesn't work. Therefore, we need the second condition. So once we show theorem 1, then we can also show and prove theorem 2, which says that if a graph, given a graph G, if there is common knowledge between a subset of nodes M, then this must be a complete bipartite graph, okay, at least. You can have more links, but this is the minimal graph that you would need. So we need these structures to be able to generate common knowledge. And complete bipartite graph is 2 sets of nodes. So here you can see 1, 2 is one set, 3, 4, 5, 6 is another set, where there are no links between the nodes within the same set, but they are connected to all the nodes in the other set, right? This is the structure that will generate the common knowledge. And as I said, which I will go very quickly, we also introduced this threshold inference. What does that mean? So if you look at this example, when an individual sees an agent, so the individual with threshold 4, which means he needs 3 more people to participate. When he sees this person who has participated in the previous round, this should be S at this point, they turn and participate because agent 4 needs 2 more people, and he's seeing one of his friends that actually turned, and it means that there must be at least 2 people that participated in the protest, right? So therefore, this gives them enough information to participate. So this is a novel mechanism that we had introduced. So agent with threshold 4 sees an agent with threshold 3, which means that there are at least 3 people who have participated, and including me, I'm fine to go. So that's the inference mechanism. So far for this toy model, as I said before, we develop computational models just to introduce some realistic features, because when you model on networks, you cannot solve everything analytically. So you will need some computational models to introduce these realistic features. So you can work with real networks. You can add some stochasticity in the model, because, for example, what we had assumed so far is when there's a link between 2 agents, the link is always there. So they're communicating, and I'm always sure that you're always checking your Facebook. You're always there. When I tell you and you tell me, okay, I know that you saw my message, but this may not be the case. So we can actually introduce some probability to these links, right? I send a message to you, but maybe you didn't get my message. So we can introduce these stochasticity to the model. But there are some challenges, because for the Choi model, we need to compute all the maximal clicks. And for our model, we need to find all the biclicks in the complete bipartite graphs, and which are actually computationally NP-hard problems. They are computationally intractable. So we take 3 real networks. One is the Facebook network. One is the high school student interactions in New River Valley. And one is the EdHealth data, which is a friendship network. And as you can see, they have very different properties. So number of nodes, Facebook is a larger network than the other 2, and number of edges and average degree, how many neighbors each person has is a degree. This is the average degree, number of biclicks, etc. So we're analyzing using networks that are very different in structure. So when we look at the basic behavior, given these simulations, what we observe is an inverted U-shaped relationship, which is what we expect. So here you will see actually the cumulative nodes that are turning. So at time 0, no one is in the revolt stage. And as time goes, people start participating in the protest. So we introduce, one of the things that we introduced, as I said before, is the participation probability. It is the probability of you being active on Facebook. So in our stylized model, the participation probability is 1. So it's this curve that you see with the spike. When we lower that probability, you will see less number of people participating at each stage. So this is the basic behavior of the model, introducing these realistic features. The other thing that we have done is to compare the classic diffusion models that I mentioned before to our model. So you will see that, okay, this is the, oops. So you will see here the common knowledge models, both Chue model and the Facebook model that I mentioned before, and we get contagion. And we're keeping the thresholds really high, actually, so that we don't want everyone to turn right away, because with lower thresholds, you end up having a contagion which spreads right away. So we're trying to actually, in order to see some dynamics, we're keeping the threshold of individuals in the network very high. When we look at the classic threshold, we do not see as many nodes turning to a revolting state, although we're seeding 30% of the nodes, basically. So it doesn't actually work when the thresholds are higher for classic diffusion. So you get a wider spread with the Facebook model. And this behavior is representative of all 3 networks that I mentioned before. In other studies, we also look at what happens when the thresholds are different. So far, in the models I presented, everyone has the same preference. So everyone is threshold, and we use in the computational models, we use average degree of the network to keep it high. But we also look at different preferences of individuals. We also try to understand what is an approximate model that we can use that can represent the behavior of the full model. So in this second paper, we use star-shaped structures instead of looking at all the bicyclics, which I mentioned as being NP-hard problem. And we see that actually it aligns very well with the full model. So that helps because it reduces the computational time and is more efficient. Another thing that we have studied is whether social contagion spread without key players. As I said, in the social contagion models, the focus is usually on a set of nodes who are key on the network. This could be degree, centrality, or it could be a shell that they're part of. And we're using a network which is a representative network for void of key players. So you will not find any key players in those networks. And what we observe is that actually in our model, since the spread can start from anywhere in the network, we obtain contagion. On the other hand, in the classic diffusion models, it will not spread. So I can show that chart to you. Yes, so this is, even in absence of key players, in our model, we can observe the contagion dynamics. But in the classic threshold model, although we, again, introduce some seeds, since the graph does not have any key players, any central nodes, every node is more homogeneous in this ER graph. Therefore, we do not obtain that contagion. So that's one of the results that we presented. So the main results are, we have developed a dynamic framework using a Facebook-type contagion model and compared it to classic diffusion models that have been in the literature. We observed the complete bipartite structures to be the necessary structures that result in contagion. We use 3 real networks to understand when we introduce realistic features, how does the dynamics change? We also use an approximate model by just using star networks as opposed to bicyclics, all bicyclics, and we observe that we can actually produce similar results. And we all, as I said, even when there are no key players on the network, we can obtain contagion when we look at the online communication. So these were the main results of the mathematical and computational models that we have been studying. So our next steps will be to develop an experimental framework with integrated set of experiments, because as you might have noticed, these are very stylized mathematical and computational models which may not be actually explaining the phenomena in the real world. So in order to be able to test the assumptions and the predictions of the theoretical models, we need to understand how people, given these networks, will behave. We need to understand behavioral aspects of these models. How do people behave? So for example, we find a very rigid structure, complete bipartite graph, as a graph which generates common knowledge. But we do not know whether that will be the case when we put people in this communication platform and when they start communicating, whether they're always communicating, whether that allows them to coordinate and participate. So this is the work that will be funded by Minerva, where we will have 3 different sets of experiments, one in the physical laboratory, the second one in the online platform, which we will use Mechanical Turks to recruit subjects and to make them play the game. And in the last part, we will use neuroimaging experiments. We use laboratory and online experiments both in order to overcome the challenges in each strategy. So with online experiments, you can actually have a lot of subjects, and that will be pretty cheap, but you will have no control over the subjects. So therefore, we have to start with laboratory experiments to understand the comprehension of these subjects, which we cannot physically see. On the other hand, with online experiments, we can actually reach to a larger pool of subjects. Therefore, we can study even larger networks than just looking at 5-node, 6-node, 10-node networks. And we have gathered a multidisciplinary team for this work, and it encompasses very different disciplines: statisticians, economists, psychologists, etc. And we are hoping to have very interesting results, more realistic results than what I presented today, and I'm hoping to present those results in future presentations. Thank you. If you don't ask questions, I have more slides, so.
We have a brief award presentation to make at the end, but I wanted to take some time for people to ask questions. Obviously, this was a very good talk. I really enjoyed it. Selecting you for this award was not a hard problem. So.
Thank you. Sure.
So what are you going to do with the functional MRI?
So we want to, I think Mark can chime in here because we wrote that part together, but people have done studies where they look at the neurocorrelates when people are making risky decisions. So you can see different parts of the brain that is functioning when I'm deciding to choose a lottery, which is more risky versus which is more safe. Lottery meaning that, you're telling me you're going to get $100 for sure, versus you have a lottery where you have probabilities for these payoffs. So risky will bring you more payoff, but anyway. So people have done studies where they look at what parts of the brain actually are being stimulated when they are making risky decisions. But in these experiments, usually people are still experimented like individually. So they do not look at collective decision making. So I want to understand what happens when I also want to understand what you're going to choose. If both of our decisions is going to affect my payoff, I want to understand whether that makes a difference in the parts of the brain that are stimulated. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So you're going to be observing them while they're playing a literal game that is designed to show them Facebook-like information about participation. They have to decide. Yeah,
exactly. So we're communicating, or I don't know how whether that is possible to communicate in this laboratory, but when we're sending messages to each other, and if it's a problem which will which will benefit both of us if we're making a mutual decision. Otherwise, I'm going to end up in a very risky situation if you do not participate with me. So what happens? This is what we want to understand with these experiments. So collective decision making, whether that's different than unilateral decision making in the parts of the brain.
Cool.
And Reed Montague, he will be the lead for that part.
Does your common knowledge model
Yes.
allow for key players, I think you were calling them, that do not have a structural advantage?
No, it allows, but the result that I was showing is saying even in absence of key players, you can actually still have contagion because given a network, it's not starting from one point or one person and spreading. You can have like small groups getting organized. So it can explain different phenomena that we observe in real world, like
Without a key
smaller
player, structure matters.
Exactly.
But can you go the other way? When structure hasn't changed, but the player has changed, and all of a sudden you have a contagion?
Player become, but
So like
the
revolutionary, Lech Walesa in Poland or somebody, structure hasn't changed, but it's that person for some reason has more influence in the network.
So here the key players are actually defined by the structure.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're making a player, a key player,
Right.
it means that you're changing the structure
Right.
because that's the definition. But if we introduce leadership qualities, for example, to that person,
that-
like based on that's something we would like to study in the experiments, basically, because we want to understand what characteristic of a person can actually inform individuals more and maybe gather more people,
Supersede the structure.
given the structure is the same.
Right.
Oh, that's a good question.
So it's very difficult to follow everything exactly, but a few thoughts come to my mind. You call this a game. Now, in a typical game, you have two players, each have their own utility functions. You have a payoff function, and one player is trying to outdo the other player. So there is a competitive element there. I guess this is more of a cooperative game.
Yes, it's a. So I'm trying to go back to that slide. So if you remember, this is the kind of structure. Actually, so the penalty is so when you use the utility function, the payoff function that I showed to you, and if you have only two players, this is what you would get, right? But in this case, non-participate, which is staying at home, will give you 0, and doing something that is different than the other player will give you -z, which is the penalty. So it's a coordination game. It's different than the competition game.
No, but it's a cooperative game. Cooperative. They're both cooperating.
But in game theory, actually, this is called a non-cooperative because they are still deciding individually. The decision is
Right,
not.
they are deciding individually,
Yes.
but their overall objective is not to eliminate the other person, but both of them should maximize their utility.
Exactly.
Second question,
But they are not trying to maximize both of they're still trying to maximize their own utility.
right.
So
But,
that's
you
why
know,
it's a
they
non-cooperative.
recognize that if they really try to the only way they can maximize their utility is to eliminate the opponent. But
Yeah,
that
it's
they're
not.
doing.
Yeah.
Second question is you mentioned diffusion. I didn't quite get exactly what is the diffusion part. The diffusion to me is a stochastic process in continuous time and continuous state. So where's the diffusion part?
So here, it's the diffusion of knowledge, basically. So as I said, for example, when you look at the dynamics of the model, right? If I see my neighbor that is participating with a high threshold, it means that there was a knowledge that was diffused towards me. And that gives me more information. Now, when I take the participating action, the person next to me will know that there are enough number of people that are participating. So it's the knowledge.
Time reversibility. You renege after you declare your participation.
Could
Change
you?
your mind.
Yeah, here we don't. But
So
that's something we
no
can.
time reversibility.
Yes, exactly. So that's something that we could actually study computationally. Like, what happens if people, after a certain time period, if I'm understanding you correctly, decide to go back to the safe state? Yeah. So that's something we can actually study computationally. We haven't done yet. First computational, and now we can also study that in the lab experiments, trying to see what happens after a certain number of rounds, whether people decide to go back. But in this case, since the payoff function is defined like this, theoretically, they won't have any incentive to go back. But that's not what we observe in the real life, obviously. Thank you.
Hi, Gizem. Thanks a lot. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So the diffusion idea, I was thinking, I'd never realized this before, but I get the knowledge diffusing. Have you ever thought of what would happen if the thresholds could also diffuse simultaneously? So the idea is that my threshold could be a function of something like, you're getting close to wanting to coordinate. You notice people have lower thresholds, or that there's a lot of evidence that everybody's going to revolt. Your threshold would actually drop, almost like a response to risk. And if that would happen, do you have any sense of how that would play out in the dynamics?
So people are becoming less risky,
So
because here the threshold actually shows how risk averse you are, right?
Right, but imagine a situation where the threshold could also diffuse socially on the network itself. So over time, my threshold might be a 4 to start, and Aaron's, I notice, is a 3, and Higdon's is a 3 or 2, and I'm thinking I might actually have a threshold that's too high. And you could relate that somehow to the payoff function.
Yeah, that will be a different model,
Yeah,
but I
okay.
understand. So that will be an influence, right?
Yeah, right. It would kind
so
of
you're
combine
actually
the two. Right.
interaction. But here, the network is not the interaction only; it's the communication network. So that's a bit different. But but that will be an influence kind of mechanism. But here, everyone's threshold is given, and over time, that could be studied probably experimentally.
Yeah, because I wonder if it makes sense experimentally in the sense that people might actually be doing that. Because if you have your threshold too high, you're screwing up your payoff potentially.
So that will require first trying to understand what people's threshold is
in the first
which
place,
is
yeah.
very tricky to do. So in the initial set of experiments, I think we will need to give people what their thresholds are, because we still don't know, and it's not in the literature, what people's actual thresholds are. Right? It could depend on a lot of factors, whether people are. So that's something one could study. But here, it's all given.
Gizem, it was great.
Thank you.
But along that same line, in your model, the players don't know each other's thresholds.
So that's what they communicate with each other.
Oh, you're right. They're communicating their thresholds, not just that they're participating. Okay, never mind.
So that's how they find out about their willingness to participate. I'm telling you, I want to participate if the threshold is only 0 and 1, let's say. So, and then once they participate, they also communicate their actions too, right? What they have, whether they have participated or not. They post on Facebook and people observe that information, which gives them more information. So another thing that is lacking in the model is it's not always Facebook that you get information, right? There could be we still have the traditional media where you can get information about how many people are actually protesting. So that could also convince you to participate in a protest if you have a high threshold. But this is not studied here. We're just looking at what happens in this local environment through local interaction, local communication.
Sorry, I have one question over here. Sorry. Very interesting presentation. I know this is covering social networks as a whole, but I guess my main question is, do you see your research trending in a way that you may actually separate different social networks as to how people communicate? Because I guess in my experiences, I've seen, Facebook is kind of a broader way. There's a lot more involved in that network, whereas, say, Twitter is within 140 characters, and then you have some that are within photos and certain videos that may influence people to join a specific network. So do you see your research kind of, I guess, separating those different social networks to see what kind of different reactions you get?
Yes, definitely. Thanks for the question. We have already actually started to think about how we would model this on Twitter, because Twitter is a completely different mechanism, right? Like, it's not you writing on someone's wall, but retweet seems to be the process that spreads the information faster. So that's definitely on the agenda, yeah. And we can also analyze that also experimentally, trying to see when we created a framework, experimental framework that looks like Twitter, how it would work. So the initial framework that we'll use, I can actually show to you, will look a bit like Facebook, where people have walls and they have some instructions, and they can observe their friends and what their friends are doing, and they are able to send each other messages. These messages could be on the wall of someone, which is a public message, where friends could see. They could also be private messages. So these private messages are different, right? Because when I send you a private message, it's like emailing more than without the CC, etc. But you send a direct message, and it's only that person that has that information. So we also want to understand that difference in the experiments, trying to see when we let people just use private messages, what will happen, which will be similar to Chue's framework. And when we allow them to use the wall, which are public messages, whether we'll see any differences in these setups. But yeah, Twitter would be another one. And I think Mark is working on an experiment where you are creating a framework that looks like Twitter. Right? But we would like to model that first, and then look at computationally what the dynamics are, and then experiment that. But thank you.
Gizem, what about the work you did this summer with the students and how the military soldiers use different media, social media for different purposes? Wasn't it Twitter they used were they angry? I can't remember now.
Okay, so that's a bit different because in that work we didn't look at the structure of these networks. We're just looking at what people say and trying to understand whether their sentiments say anything about the attrition rates that we observe on these, social media venues like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So we do that's possible too. But the problem is, like on Facebook, you cannot extract a person's full interaction network, full communication network, right? We use one Facebook network, which we found, which is publicly available, but when people have privacy concerns, they don't have public accounts, so that would be difficult. But Twitter would be a good place to look at how people are communicating and extract the network from there. But we haven't done that yet. So to see, for example, whether people who are more connected, whether they are sending more negative or positive messages could be very interesting. So those will be the kind of key players, influential players in that network. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Well, I think we'll try to wrap this up. We'll continue with the reception outside. If people want to stay and talk more, but we have an award to present part of all this. So I was apologizing to Sally, but this doesn't come with a large check associated with the faculty association. So but I want to say thank you for participating, and we're very honored to give you this award this year. And I think if we sort of look at things that the university is interested in and the kind of things that we want to make our name for, this is right along the lines of that. I remember when I was in graduate school, which is when it was, but one of my faculty was asked, well, what's the biggest thing we could come up with? He said, well, you could come up with an analytic model of behavior. And I think you're taking great steps toward that. So
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Okay, now I can.
So well behaved.